Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'm your host, Konrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews, and from superheroes to average Joes, here's what I read this week. So I finished up my copy of Die Fantasy Heartbreaker, which is Volume 1 from Image, written by Kieron Gillen and drawn by Stephanie Hans. And I must say that this book creeped me out. I've got a YouTube show where I talk about comics. Obviously, I'm a bit of a nerd. I do like myself some D&D, and this book was super cool. So it has a fairly simple premise. Bunch of friends get together, they play D&D, magical stuff happens, they get transported into their game. Now that's pretty cool. A very open-ended start to this. What Kieron Gillen does with that, though, is take it down a very horrific road and really explores game mechanics as story plot, which is cool. It does it in a very fun way, as well as trauma. And of course, we all love talking about trauma. Well, the kids in this book get their more than fair share of it. Basically, small spoiler, how it works, their friend who is the DM gets magical dice, 6 of them. So each being one of the classical pieces, a d20, d12, 10, 8, 6, and 4. And each character, depending on the die that they need, gets that dice. So a fighter gets a d6, for instance, and the DM gets the d20. And as the game starts, this group of kids are pulled in, and then the next thing that we see happen is a number of years later, they come out of it, and one of them is missing an arm, another one's, traumatized, and that gets carried with them for their whole life, especially because one of them is missing. And where the story picks up after that event is at a reunion where, as fully grown adults, I believe it's a decade or so later, they get back together and they're drawn back in. And this is where it really picks up. So one, all the characters, they're pretty stereotypical characters. So you've got like a brash guy who just wants to have fun. He's like the fighter. And then you get some characters like the one that I like, which is he's a type of paladin, I believe. But he basically feeds off of sadness. So the worse that he feels, the more power he can conjure. And that gets real nasty when, one, dealing with trauma, but also the protagonist, I'll say, the character that gets the most time and attention out of the 6 of them, has the ability to manipulate emotions. And so this person can literally go and make this friend of theirs feel like basically the worst depression ever, and as a gameplay mechanic, boost the hell out of their stats. But then these 2 friends have to live with the fact that, okay, I understand, yes, we had to win, but now I'm dealing with extra trauma that's false and yet real, and my friend caused this. And the friend that did this, like the main character, now has to live with the fact that they just put their friend through hell. And it's really crazy stuff like that, and it's not all like super classic fantasy. There is a character that requires these types of coins to keep going, and they're like mechanical, so they get, prosthesis and all sorts of really cool futuristic powers once they have this fuel. And again, all dealing with very interesting plot within their own world as well. So there's one character who gets connected to this god, and her trauma fuels this god and fuels a religion, and they have this really codependent, disgusting, painful cycle of need on each other. And it doesn't introduce this in any like textbook blah 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 way. It doesn't like feed this to you. It just shows you how messed up this world is. Again, the writing by Kieron Gillen in this, fabulous. I think Kieron is probably one of a handful of writers of comics and writers in general that has really made themselves stand out with some of the more amazing takes that they have on traditional stories, as well as something like Die here, which is quite original. And there's a lot of Die, by the way. This is the first volume. I believe we're on 3 or 4 now. I think for me, what really made this book was there's a particular scene that these characters are fighting a dragon, or rather, these characters and many more are fighting a dragon, but in like World War I trench warfare. So there's this giant beast that's around and it's coming to get you, and you're in trenches. And there's like the NPCs, the non-player characters that are there that would classically help facilitate a story, and you would interact with them and learn from them. They're fighting this dragon and dying. Now, that's like, yeah, okay, that happens, right? Like any fantasy story, if you're going to have a giant dragon and it's going to be terrifying, it has to be terrifying for a reason, and that's because it can melt your face off with fire. Well, when you're faced with that as a reality, that's not fun anymore. And that's what these guys go through, or people. And then to take that a step up, this particular scene that really just locked this book in for me, the 6 of them, or the 5 of them, make it through. They defeat the dragon, and they're headed to the battlefield, and you see the same little group of NPC soldiers who just all died. You see them again getting their orders from their sergeant or their commander, sending them back into the field. So not only did they just witness these 5 NPCs that did not really exist, and yet or fully fleshed out people with feelings and fears and emotions die, now a clone of them is going to go do it again. And that leads me to believe that this is a very horrifying cycle that just happens. And that's what I'm talking about when I say like gameplay mechanics. So for anyone who spent time playing enough video games, you'll notice, if you really watch, a lot of NPCs are on sort of a predetermined loop. Especially if you don't interact with them. Like, I'm playing Ghost of Tsushima, and if you've really watched some of the villagers, they just kind of go about their day realistically, and they fiddle with a thing here, and they move, and fiddle with a thing there, and they go back to their house, and fiddle with something there, and then they move on. And they're just on that predetermined loop. And that seems peaceful, right? Oh, you made tea, you got fish at the market, you went to see your friend, you made dinner, you had tea, and, you looped. Great, no problem. But when your loop is going into the World War I trenches to fight a dragon, and there's just you and your 4 other buddies who are going to die every time, and you feel that is horrifying. And this whole world is set up with stuff like that not only are in and of itself, just as like an observer, disgusting and creepy and just make you feel awful. That stuff, that horrifying hell, mixes itself in with the 5 different characters in very different ways, obviously, but it breaks into them, and that's where their trauma starts from. So yeah, it's a crazy wild book, and it is a horror book. Like, I know I say fantasy a lot, but it is horror based, and this is just an example of some of the art. It's gorgeous. It has so much detail and color in it that I wouldn't know where to begin. And it has this, and this is what pulled me into the art, it has this horror feel to it. So, if under certain any other circumstance, that art could be very nice and bright and it's friends getting together, but because of the use of the backlighting and then the dark interior of that room and the shadows it casts on everyone, it gives it this really dark feeling. And what the characters are saying is not dark, but it gives that just enough of that twist. And when you go from that into this world of colorful hells, it's jarring. And I think that work together between the artist and the writer really brings you in. And another thing that I really liked, and it never even dawned on me, I just kind of, because I think I got swept up in it, but I think like it is done in a very nonchalant way that makes this very powerful to me, because it took me a bit to click into it. The main protagonist that I referenced earlier, their name is Dominic. And that would leave me to go, his name is Dominic. And Dominic has like long blonde hair. We first are introduced to them in 1991, so it would be very a grunge, Nirvana-esque, that kind of attitude. And the next time, like within this world of Die, I'll call it, the character that Dominic becomes is this. And this is the person that can manipulate emotions. And she is a very powerful, you have a better term for it, but a wizard or a sorceress. And as mentioned, that never clicked. Like, I didn't like, oh, trans or something like that. It was just, it wasn't like they made that a token thing. They're like, oh, by the way, Dominic's character is a woman in this world. And no one drew attention to it. No one was like, oh my god, or no one, it wasn't like this super celebrated thing. It was just like every player in the campaign, of the kids, as well as obviously as adults, just kind of went, oh yeah, Dominic's a girl. And that was the end of the discussion. And then they went like, okay, so Dominic, what's your type, class, and blah, 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 blah. And while I'm all for celebrating the LGBTQ, I think there is, to an extent, there's a way to normalize it. And I think Kieron Gillen did a solid job by just doing it. Not being like, here's our token, trans character, yay. It was just like, oh yeah, here's this character. They have a really complex arc. There's really screwed up stuff happening to them. By the way, they're trans. And it doesn't even have that by the way quality. It's just, it gets presented to you. You're just like, Dominic and his sister are now a woman and a woman. And because of how fluidly that happened, and they keep the hair, which I think is why I didn't click into it right away, it just kind of goes. And I think for me that was really powerful, because it wasn't like, hey, look at the trans person. It was just these 6 people. And I respected the hell out of that, because they explore a lot with these 6 different individuals, or 5 different individuals, about how they interact with each other, what they think of each other, as well as how, coming from those different life experiences, they deal with trauma and how they support each other or don't. And what I found really powerful was just the art as well. So Stephanie Hans, who does the art in this book, never let the colors be boring. So there are times when the color scheme of their world is like normal, like every day. Then you get shots like this that use extremely huge contrasts in color to illuminate things. You then got shots that I showed you earlier where there's just tons of reds and blacks and dark colors that allow you to explore the emotion of the surrounding, as well as get drawn into this fantastical world. So together the team is fabulous. So again, guys, obviously I like this book a lot. Right off the bat, 1, 2, and 3 stars. Kieron Gillen's writing, fabulous. It'll suck you into this world just like these characters were sucked into their game, and it will not show you mercy. The art in it will give you such a vivid visual that you can't help but enjoy it, but also, like me, feel a little creeped out by it because of the moods that it sets. And those 2 styles worked perfectly for this story. For me, a 4th star, because I got through this quick and I absolutely loved the characters and how they dealt with their traumas and how they interacted with each other, given that some of them caused their trauma in their friends. And finally, a full 5 stars, because for this book, I absolutely want to pick up the second one. But like I said, I took a lot out of it. I especially enjoyed the representation of Dominic / Ash. Ash is the player character name, as a trans person, but not tokenizing it, just allowing it to be. And that was beautiful. So guys, if you have not yet read Die, pick it up. It's fabulous. Go to your local comic book shop. I'm sure they'll have a copy, or they can get one for you fast. There are a number of volumes out. This one collects the first 5 floppies. And of course, after that, you could check out things like Comixology to get a digital version. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more great reviews, and comment down below about what you thought of Die, and let's start a conversation. Thanks for tuning in.